políticos que tienen entretenido por supuestos zapatistas, por supuestos líderes laborales que luchan por la libertad, de los obreros que luchan por justicia. Decirle y mandarle un mensaje al gobierno y a los gobiernos norteamericanos por la ola anti-inmigrante de los Estados Unidos y a los obreros, y un mensaje también al gobierno aquí en México, que la lucha del obrero está firme.
Welcome to Voices in Mexico, Democracia Ya. I'm your host, Al Rojas, and this program is being brought to you by North Americans for Democracy in Mexico. Joining me here today is Alejandro Garza. Alejandro, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here, Al. Thank you very much.
Today we will be focusing on Chiapas in Mexico, in the encuentro that was held and as per the EZLN in southern Mexico. Alejandro, let's talk about Chiapas and let's talk about Mexico.
I think it's important now, and the viewers might want to consider that it's also a topic that hasn't been covered much in today's media, in today's newspapers, talk shows, or news reports. There's been a blank out. I understand that in August, 10 of us from Sacramento, yourself leading the delegation, went to Chiapas in August and joined 450 other people from the United States to Mexico. What was it? What happened over there? How many more people were there?
You know, Alejandro, it's a very good point that in this country we have, and through the medium of the newspaper and television, lack enough information from Mexico. Yes, there were 10 people that went as a delegation to Chiapas, and it was an interesting encounter. We were, first of all, being invited by the rebel force that is called the EZLN, the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional.
Okay.
And in being hosted there, it was quite an experience. So,
what kind of people went from this area with you in August?
well, we had several professors from the Sacramento State University,
Okay.
and we had some students also that participated, and we had also some labor leaders from the local area. We had activists who are involved in human rights and pro-democracy groups also. We had a contingent of 10 to 12 people who left Sacramento to join others in Mexico City, and from there traveled to Chiapas, the southern state of Mexico.
It's one of the poorest states in the country. I understand that nutrition and child mortality is also very, very, very high, and it's although the place is rich. Now, when you and the group went there, what did you encounter? Did you go from Mexico City and then fly into Chiapas?
We flew in from Mexico City into Tuxtla Gutierrez in Chiapas. From there we went by truck, bus to the city of San Cristobal de las Casas. And while we were there, we went through this indoctrination station where we went through to receive our credentials to travel to the areas that have been designated. There was 5 communities in Chiapas in which the group was being designated to participate in this conference.
Now this is a conference, but it was up under the stars and out in the open. And I understand this is a war zone, that there has been since January of 1994. There has been actual battles going on between the Mexican army and the EZLN or the Zapatistas.
That's correct.
Were you afraid? Were the group afraid?
Well, some of the people in the group had been knowledgeable as to entering a war zone, and that war zone is being surrounded by 40,000 Mexican military soldiers. We encountered, first of all, the hardship of the car caravan and bus caravan entering the Lacadon jungle, rainforest, in southern Chiapas.
We saw that in the
Right.
clip here
Right.
we're looking at.
And in so doing, it took us 18 hours to travel by bus in a caravan. And having arrived at the immigration checkpoint with the government, Mexican government, there was threats of being interrogated by the immigration, and also our pictures taken, and questioned why we were all so interested in going through to this conference in the heart of the Lacandon jungle.
I see.
In doing that, we, at least our group, particular group, must have been 1,000 of us in this bus caravan. It took us another additional 8 hours from the checkpoint to arrive finally in La Realidad, which is the center and base station of the EZLN, the rebel force in the Lacandon jungle. When we arrived at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was raining. It was outstanding because here we are in some lonely road out in some middle of some jungle, and having traveled so many hours into the wee hours of the morning, raining, and here we see Zapatistas who are wearing their ski mask, and it's raining, and they have their rain gear on. Some of them didn't have rain gear on, and off in the distance we could hear a little marimba band. It was playing. It was unusual. Here, 4 o'clock in the morning, they're waiting for us. And these indigenous Indians, and the ones that we saw had military gear. They had machine guns, and they had rifles, and some of them had their ski masks. So, and arriving there, what was really phenomenal is that there was so much rain and mud, and in light of that, we were being invited into their own center of setting.
Well, that's what struck me about this trip in August, is that you had so many people from the United States and from Sacramento, from California, but you also had, I understand, about 4,000 or 5,000 people, ordinary citizens from different countries in the world, that went to Chiapas and went in the jungle just like you did, and you braved the bad conditions and the danger. Why did you, who called the conference, and what was the purpose of it?
The conference was called by the leadership of the EZLN, the Liberation Army of Zapatista Army.
That's led by...
well, one of the leaders is Subcomandante Marcos. Is more visible and well-known throughout the world. And there's...
Did you meet him?
Yeah.
Tell me the truth. Did you have a chance to talk with him?
I met him. There was a little bit of an encounter, and he spoke to us.
Okay.
And so did Comandante Tacho and Comandante Moises, and Comandante Ramona was also there, and a lot of the leadership was there.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but so what was the purpose of the conference?
Well, the purpose of the conference is to bringing together the 5 continents of activists and former activists involved in social issues, social causes, and social justice causes in different parts of the world. There was many people that came there. Total number was a little less than 5,000 representatives.
I understand that.
That was from Europe, Latin America, Asia, and Australia and New Zealand. The fact was that the number of people were larger from the European continent and other parts other than the United States.
Okay.
I think what was interesting is that the languages. It was like it was strange because you were hearing French, you were hearing German, you're hearing Russian, you're hearing Chinese and Korean being spoken.
Yeah.
The whole purpose and intent of the conference was to bring together a coalition of groups of people to discuss the issues of neoliberalism, the economic policies of the world, the economic policies that relate to the impact of those policies by the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the numerous powerful corporate multinational corporations throughout the world.
Well, you know, it's not a purpose that is strange to our viewers and to the California public. As you can see, our organization was involved with the NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, and as I understand, the Zapatistas on January 1st, 1994 did their uprising, the first in Mexico in many, many years, to protest the signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement. So you're saying that there was many people that wanted to go to the next step and see how they could fight the North American Free Trade Agreement? Was that mentioned in the conference?
The conference did mention the North American Free Trade Agreement as being one economic policy on that basis, but they also mentioned the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Tariff, which is an agreement that basically is targeted throughout the world now, affects different countries, but mostly agreements that relate to the European market. Those were discussions that took place in a conference setting, in workshop settings, in the 5 communities. And these 5 communities, one of them happened to be La Realidad, which is where we were assigned to.
What does La Realidad mean?
La Realidad basically was
translates
is a small community, campesino community that was named by the indigenous population as La Realidad, the reality.
So you went to reality.
Yeah, the reality was that you were living there amongst the poverty, amongst the people, mingling with the people, mingling with the children, eating with them. What was interesting was the fact that you recognized that you were living right in amongst the rebels themselves. You had Subcomandante Marcos, who on occasions came to the conference to speak to the entire conference. And when he spoke to the conference, he's a very poetic man and a very committed man to the struggle of justice and democracy and human rights. And although he says himself that he is not the leader, but one of the leaders, his real leadership comes from people like Comandante Ramona, Comandante Tacho, Comandante Moises. So there's a tremendous leadership there with the Zapatistas in this part of Chiapas, who were leading the struggle.
In the clips that we've seen and the viewers may look at, I saw that there was, in the rebel forces, they were mixing with the democracy organizations in Mexico, like, there's a whole variety that involves students and housewives and labor leaders. Was there an understanding that they were in the same boat? I mean, is the problem of neoliberalism or the corporate power affecting us both?
In the discussion that took place in the workshop sessions, when we started to talk to the Germans and the Russians and the French and the Italians and the South Americans, they were saying the same things as it relates to impact on workers, economic impacts on workers in those countries as it relates to the same impacts, economic impacts in this country, which is privatization, downsizing, unemployment, workers find themselves without jobs, the transfer of wealth, multinational corporations to other parts of other worlds to exploit other workers. So it's the pitting of worker against worker.
You mean the division that we've had here in this state, like on race, on racism, and Proposition 209, and this kind of things were addressed to in some way?
Those things came out on the basis of clearly that related to, as in Mexico, indigenous Indians being the lowest bottom, the lowest levels, and discrimination on the part of the government in poverty and economic poverty as it relates to social attributes, to relates to uplifting people's living standards. All those things are a reality as it relates to Mexico, and things that are happening in the U.S. and things that are happening in Europe, or for that matter in other parts of Asia, because we did have people from those parts of the world. And I think that was what was really took me aback, is that here we were, people from all over the world, in some remote jungle out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by troops and military air transport, surveillance planes flying overhead, trying to intimidate us, I think.
It took a lot of guts and a lot of...
Well,
deep convictions of all the people concerned.
I think there were a lot of
yourself,
people. I think there were a lot of people who were really taken with the faces of the people, the children walking in the mud, as you will see in the film clips, who carry their little brother or sister, an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old carrying their little brother and sister. When I talk and people talk to you about working, I talked to one indigenous Indian who was going to work, and I kept talking to him. Well, how much money are you going to earn today? He kept saying, "Money? What do you mean money?" And I said, "Yeah, money. How much do you earn?" He says, "We don't earn money." He says, "What we earn is we bring back corn, we bring back beans for coffee beans, we bring back wood for firewood. That's money to us." So basically what they were telling me is that's how they survive. They don't survive on the basis of making money.
It almost seems that it was twofold also from what I read and talking with you and others that went, is that by you being there, it's almost giving the Zapatistas and the Mayan indigenous people there and the farm workers there an ability to survive, because I'm told that every other day there are police forces, security forces going in and evicting people and murdering people.
Well, I'll give you an example. Right now, there's a lot of repression. There's been kidnappings, raping of indigenous women by the military. There's been white guards who are out actually going to people's homes, taking people illegally and arresting people.
What are white guards now?
White guards are like undercover military police who are civilians or dressed in civilian clothes, who enter people's homes at the middle of the night, early morning hours, and they selectively go after the indigenous leaders, and by doing that they put the fear into that community for their participation in exercising their right to protest in regards to issues that relate to their community. These kinds of things are the kinds of things that are real right now, but what's really real is the fact that you have people who are surrounded by the Mexican government, the Mexican military, and at the same time disallowing these individuals the right to participate in their own government. So those are the kinds of things that we were able to absorb from the people who were there. But I think what really comes to home is when you have indigenous Indian poor campesino workers who are actually inviting us to that part of the world, the most abandoned part of Mexico.
And it's amazing that these are people who hold a rich cultural and historical influence in this hemisphere. They're one of the primary advanced civilizations. Before we go on, I wanted to ask, what were the major decisions that were made there after, and what are the plans upcoming as for the Encuentro of August 1996?
Well, I think the plans are, or a lot of what happened in the Encuentro was, you have to understand that this is one of the first type of encounters of this type that's ever happened in this part of the world, the Western Hemisphere, where you have people who are being killed and under the threat of being killed and annihilated. In other words, the Zapatistas only live because they have guns, and the fact is that they use that as the last resort. We being there is their assurances of being alive, staying alive. When the Mexican government saw that we entered the Lacandon rainforest, we became a political force for the indigenous Indian communities, not only the Zapatistas, but other indigenous Indians outside of being Zapatistas, but being just indigenous poor people who don't have any real assurances of security. So in essence, the fact that there's so much out there, there's such a connection through the electronic media, through the computer, internet community, we're able to now translate what's happening in Mexico all over the world and what's happening in the U.S. or in Europe all over the world. So there's a connection there. Now you asked me what's going to happen, or what was the outcome. Well, I think there was a recognition on the part of Subcomandante Marcos from the very beginning that they were allowing us to come to them to have a discussion as to where do we go from here as it relates to how we connect with the numbers of people throughout the world to make ourselves a political force as it relates to what's happening and connecting with one another.
So
in other words,
like including the rest of the world and the people, the countries, in the discussion of where do we go from now. They were asking, what do you think the rest of the world?
I think they went a bit more beyond that. They were really telling us, show us the way, help us find the way, give us your alternative to where we should go today and how we should move.
That makes sense.
And by doing that, the Zapatistas were able to draw on all these forces from around the world and be able to say to people, we are all one people. We must all come together.
That's a good thought for all of us to.
And what happens is that this becomes a message of people going back to respective communities and spreading the word. And that's what North Americans for Democracy should be. I mean, that's what you've been doing. That's what I've been doing. That's what many of us are out in the community are doing right now, all over this country, let alone Sacramento. There are many groups out there doing this.
I will say that in working with in the internet and looking at what's happening, we're getting a lot of reports out from groups that went to Mexico and are now holding, like we are, holding discussions with the public in community centers, in colleges, in churches, and I think we're getting a lot of support. There are internet still places, there are internet locations that people can go and get more information about this.
Alejandro, before this program is out, I'll ask the public to take a good look at the screen at the end. We're going to have our email that you can write to us. There is the internet information that we have access to, that we can provide this information. And if you have your own computer, we would advise you that if you need more information, you can call us, you can write to us, and we will send you that information so that we can then work with you. We can do that, and hopefully that way we can deal with the kinds of things that are happening as far as repression going on right now in Mexico at this very moment.
Now, can we, I know I have neighbors that do not speak in English. Is it possible to get some of the materials in Spanish as well?
Absolutely.
Do we have access to some of these materials?
We have information in Spanish and in English that we can send to people. Absolutely.
Okay, real good. Real good. Do you plan to go back? Does the group plan to go back to Chiapas or to Mexico? I understand in other states there's also problems. There's also very severe.
We understand that there are problems in the state of Oaxaca where there's been some killings of some campesinos, and also the state of Guerrero. There are some serious problems there also, and there's some serious problems also in the state of Tabasco also.
I understand that in all of Mexico there are not problems, but out of that conference in Chiapas, what is it that we can do here in the United States and the people who went over there? How can we get together and do something? What should we do, Al?
Well, there are many groups right now that are mobilizing letters to President Clinton, to the senator or congressman in their districts. You can also, as they're doing now, write letters to President Cedillo and also to the National Human Rights Commission in Mexico. See, one of the things that's happening right now and continues to happen is that right now the Mexican government has the largest military buildup in the history of that country as it relates to overcoming indigenous Indian protests and their right to participate in their government.
Who's selling them this arms? Are we selling them?
That's ironic that you said that. Our own President Clinton, through our own government and through our own Congress, and those people, our tax dollars, there are helicopters that are being purchased by the U.S. government, actually being given free to the Mexican government and the Mexican military. These gunships are supposed to be used for helicopters and other equipment, military equipment, for the eradication of the drug campaign.
Okay.
Now, that is not a true statement. What can people do? They can help by writing letters. They can help by doing a lot of work by supplying that information and protest to their representatives, elected representatives. If you want any information that relates to how you can do and work with us to bring about some justice in Mexico, you can write a letter to us, you can call us, and we will send you the information. We will work with you and work with you to try to bring human rights and justice for people who are struggling for their very lives. We again thank you for your having watched this program.